father, I think. In fact, who is the chief man of the district today? Why, Vassili Brekhunoff, of course. — And why so? " he continued presently. " Because I devote my whole attention to business, and work hard, not like some people who lie abed and play the fool. I don't sleep whole nights away. No, blizzard or no blizzard. Out I go if necessary, and my business gets done. They think me a fool, and laugh at my money-making. But never mind, Vassili, go on working hard, even if it makes your head ache. If necessary, spend a night in the open like this rather than lose time. Never mind if you cannot sleep either. To be able to think such thoughts is a pillow in itself," he concluded proudly. Some people seem to think that riches come to one by chance. Pooh! There is only one Mironoff in a million. No, work hard, and God will give you the rest. If only He give you health and strength, that alone should be sufficient. And the mere thought that he might one day become such a millionaire as Mironoff, who had risen from nothing, so fired Vassili with ecstasy that he yearned to have someone to speak to. Yet there was no one. Ah, but once he could win to Goviatchkina, he would have a landowner to speak to, and to bamboozle as well. " Good heavens, how it blows! " he continued, as he listened to a squall of wind which was beating against the splashboard and bending it inwards as it lashed the bark planking with snow. " It is drifting the snow so much that perhaps we shall never get out in the morning." Nothing could be seen in the white swirl of obscurity but Brownie's dark head and tail and the sack covering his back. At intervals the wind would toss the corners of the sack aloft, while in front and behind and on the other side of the sledge whirled the same uniform mass of whiteness, now lightening a little, now suddenly becoming denser. " I was a fool to have ever listened to Nikita," he thought. " We ought to have gone on again, and we should have landed somewhere. We might have reached Grishkino again, and been able to put up at Tarasa's place after all. Yet here we have to stick all night. What is the good of that? God gives to those who help themselves, but not to loafers, sluggards, and fools. I must try smoking again." He sat up, got out a cigarette, and then rolled over on his stomach to shield the flame of the match from the wind with the flap of his coat. Yet the wind found an entry somehow and blew out the matches one by one. At length he contrived to keep one alight and started smoking. He felt greatly pleased with his success, and although the wind got more of the smoke than he did, he managed to draw 3 whiffs and was much cheered by them. He rolled himself back into a sitting posture, wrapped himself up again, and started once more to think over and consider matters, until suddenly, and without warning, he lost consciousness and went off into a doze. All at once something seemed to jostle him, and he awoke. It might have been Brownie pulling away straw from beneath him, or it might have been the result of some internal disturbance, but at all events he awoke, and with his heart beating so fast and so furiously that the very sledge seemed to be shaking under him. He opened his eyes. The scene around him appeared exactly the same, except that it seemed lighter. It must be dawn, he thought to himself. It will soon be morning now. Then all at once he remembered that the fact of its getting lighter could only mean that the moon was rising. He raised himself again and looked at the cob. Brownie was standing with his hindquarters to the wind and shaking all over. The snow-heaped sacking was turned up over his back on the windward side, and the crupper was slipping down over his flank, while his snow-powdered head and wind-tossed mane and forehead tuft were more clearly visible than before. As for Nikita, he was still squatting in the same position as when he had first sat down, with his feet and the apron with which he had covered his head all piled with snow. " A muzhik never freezes," thought Vassili as he bent over the back of the sledge and looked at him. No, not for all his poor clothes. He can be trusted for that. Yet the muzhiks are a stupid lot, a mere welter of ignorance. For a moment he thought of taking the sacking off the cob's back and covering Nikita over with it, but it was too cold to get up and make the effort. Moreover, He was afraid of the cob starving if he did. "What on earth did I take Nikita for?" he reflected. "I have her stupidity to thank for it all." He was thinking of his wife. Then he rolled back into his former position by the splashboard. " My uncle spent a night in the snow like this," he went on, " yet he took no harm. Sebastian, too, once had to be dug out," he continued as another instance occurred to him. " Sebastian died, though, for he was frozen stiff as a carcass. If only we had stayed at Grishkino." Wrapping his coat more carefully about him, so that the protection of the fur should not be wasted at any point, but keep him warm from head to heels, he closed his eyes and tried to sleep again. Yet for all his efforts he could not succeed, but, on the contrary, continued absolutely alert and wakeful. Once more he began to make business calculations, and to run over his outstanding debts. Once more, too, he began to appraise himself and to congratulate himself on his position in the world. None the less, his every thought seemed to be broken in upon by a sort of haunting fear, as well as by a feeling of vexation, that they had not stayed at Grishkino. " To think of it," he murmured, " why, at this moment I might have been lying in a warm bed." More than once he turned himself over and resettled himself in a vain endeavour to find an easier position and one more protected from the wind, but each new posture proved more uncomfortable than the last. At length he raised himself again, changed his position altogether, wrapped his legs up carefully, closed his eyes, and tried to lie perfectly still. Yet either his feet, squeezed into their stiff top boots, had begun to ache, or the wind was catching him somewhere, but at all events he had not been lying long in this position before he found himself angrily remembering that at this very moment he might have been lying in a warm hut at Grishkino. Again he raised himself, again he wrapped his coat about him and resettled himself. Once he thought he heard the far-off sound of cocks crowing, whereupon he turned down the collar of his coat in a tremor of joy and listened attentively. Yet for all his straining of his ears he could hear nothing but the whistling of the wind through the shafts, the flapping of the handkerchief, and the lashing of the snow against the bark sides of the sledge. As for Nikita, he remained squatting as he had done since the previous evening. Never once had he stirred, nor returned any answer to Vassili's shouts, although the latter had called him more than once. " He seems to have no difficulty in sleeping," thought Vassili with irritation as he leant over the back of the sledge and looked at the snow-covered Nikita. In all, Vassili must have got up and lain down again at least 20 times. It seemed to him as if the night would never end. " Surely it must be morning now," he thought once as he raised himself and glanced about him. How would it be to look at my watch? But no, I might get frozen if I unhooked my coat. Yet once I knew that it was drawing towards morning, things would seem better, and we would set about harnessing the cob. In the depths of his soul, however, Vassili knew quite well that it could not be near morning yet. The truth was that his nervous panic was increasing to such an extent that he wished both to verify his supposition and to deceive himself. In the end, he finished by carefully unhooking his fur coat, thrusting his hand in, and groping about till he dug down to his waistcoat. A further series of efforts enabled him to draw out his silver watch with its enamelled chasing of flowers. Then he tried to look at it, but nothing could be seen without a light. Once more he lay down upon his elbows and stomach, as he had done when getting ready to smoke, pulled out his matches, and set about striking one. By this time he had grown more expert at the business, and, feeling for the match with the largest head of sulphur, he contrived to light it at the first attempt. Then, thrusting the dial of the watch under the light, he looked at it and could hardly believe his eyes. It was only 10 minutes past 1. The whole night lay before him. " Oh, the long, long night! " he groaned, feeling as though the frost were striking down his back already. Then, hooking up his coat again and wrapping it about